Good morning,
bolivarianos, hermanos venezolanos.
Bolivarian brothers and sisters, Venezuelan brothers and sisters, greetings, legitimate presidents of the Bolivarian Republic of Venezuela, Nicolás Maduro Moros.
Sí, mucho hablamos en estos últimos tiempos
In these times, we talk a great deal about fascism and how it is re-emerging, how it is being strengthened. And it seems to me that fascism it is not that it started. Fascism does not originate in Germany or Italy or Spain. It is true that those were the points where fascism was unmasked. Fascism was born from the time Darwin said in The Origin of the Species that the stronger ones were going to survive. And in The Origin of the Species, of course, we also find the human species.
especie humana,
And the human species,
su tendencia fue a imponerse
had a trend to impose by force, impose itself by force. Since the origins of humankind, we saw fascism already being incubated. It was a part of civilization, of the development of the empires. We saw it in Greece, exemplary Greece, Rome,
manifestaciones.
we saw different manifestations.
Más brutales
From the most brutal ones to the ones that we saw later with Hitler, Mussolini, and Franco.
¿Qué cosa es la esclavitud?
What is slavery? Well, slavery, those who installed slavery, those who promoted slavery, those who walked through life with slaves coming from Africa, who then were taken to Europe. And in Europe, there were the great British and French companies fighting for that merchandise to take it to our regions or to their regions. Who were those? Who practiced and who installed fascism through slavery? There we see the establishment as a normal thing. Something that was seen as an element that would enrich the imperialist superpowers from Europe who were fighting with each other for territories around the world, for domination around the world. Fascism was already there. And what was later called the development of freedom, of democracy, when the French Revolution took place, when we saw changes taking place in Europe, at that point, we saw the institutionalization of fascism. Because European superpowers always fighting against each other, they became the masters of the planet, the owners of the continents, of Africa, of Asia, American.
Llamamos fascismo, que fue el periodo
What we call fascism, which was the period in which an European democratic party, according to the practices of democracy in Europe, took Hitler to the presidency with the support of American companies. And then we saw Mussolini. And then Franco.
destrozó
Franco completely destroyed the Spanish people. And Franco was joined with another empire, powerful empire, which became a powerful empire, which is the Vatican, because the Vatican was an accomplice of the Nazis. They were an accomplice of the Nazis in Italy, in Spain, in Germany. In Spain, there was even an arms confrontation. Of the Catholics, Christians who were manipulated to defend democracy. And there was a war. As a war that was produced years later in Mexico. The priests were at war against advanced or progressive movements in Mexico. So we cannot close our eyes to that reality. Because the Vatican is just another instrument in all of these battles that we are fighting. It's just another tool that is a part of the great conglomerate of fascism, which in new modalities wants to dominate the world, wants to rule the world. And as they have been ruling, they invaded America, and there were 500 years. But we achieved the independence thanks to the heroism and the patriotism and the courage of Bolivar. And not only Bolivar,
todo nuestro pueblo, los Estados Unidos.
because all of our peoples have been stained with the blood of our citizens. He defended the freedom of our people. Bolivar. And to the north of our America, we saw the arrival of the other invaders. They didn't ask for permission to go to Mexico, the British, or to Spain. The Spaniards didn't ask for permission to come to America. the Europeans who continued to emigrate to the United States, they were murdering the indigenous populations. They destroyed their culture. They destroyed their way of living, their developments, as they did in our America. And these are fascist practices.
Alentó, lógicamente, más a las potencias
This, of
imperialistas.
course, encouraged even more the imperialist superpowers who were becoming stronger and stronger. This encouraged them to seek the total domination of the planet on behalf of democracy.
Luego, yo iría pasando
And then,
por el mayor acto de terrorismo
including probably the biggest act of terrorism that has been committed in the world, which were the atomic bombs of Hiroshima and Nagasaki. Quietly launched by the US government and applauded, celebrated by the European governments, the so-called democratic governments.
que produjeron muchos más muertes.
These two acts of terrorism caused more deaths and much more damage in the long term than the terrorist acts against the Twin Towers in New York. Because with the first bombs in Hiroshima and Nagasaki, there were 250,000 people who died. And then the radiation, another 200,000 people died due to diseases caused by radiation. It was not an attack against a military base. It was a bomb falling on two peaceful cities which did not have military fronts. They did not attack military fronts. They dropped these bombs cowardly against the people to force Japan to surrender. Fascism and Nazism
la gran mentira que instalaron en el mundo.
After the great lie that they told all around the world, that democracy should prevail in the world. in the name of democracy, they committed these crimes. In the name of democracy, all of these crimes mentioned by Nicolas have taken place. Invasions, thousands of millions of deaths, occupation of nations with over 2 million deaths, the so-called democratic France, occupying Algeria. But there is no democracy. So loudly proclaimed by European countries and in the United States of America. In all of these countries, what rules is the economic, the military interests of those who promote these fascist practices to make their domination a reality. And of course, there are rivalries among these superpowers, but in the end, they all agree on the same thing. The most horrendous crimes we see them every day in the media. What most horrendous crimes that those that are being committed by the Jewish government? Because the Jewish people deserves our respect. The Jewish people was also a victim of Nazism and fascism. Over 6 million people were exterminated in concentration camps in European countries. Which at the time were presented as democratic. Führer was the ruler, and how many concentration camps did they have in Poland, in how many cities? And in spite of so many crimes and so much brutality, slavery, as it was practiced at the time, well, that slavery has disappeared. But new forms of slavery have been created to chain the peoples. And here in our America, the praxis consists on blackmail. Blackmail, including economic aggressions, the so-called sanctions, which are no other than attacks, which have been imposed against Cuba, against Venezuela, against Nicaragua. And we know this too well, and we understand that these are applied against our brothers of the Caribbean, which are very fragile economies with difficulties for trade. There we see their blackmail. Even within ALBA, sometimes they have been forced to take positions that we do not share in this organization. And we understand. We understand this because they have a gun to their heads. And in our America,
se inició
there is a new stage of liberation that started after the independence of Spain, after the heroic battles fought by the greatest leader of our America, Simon Bolivar. But the battles have continued. And the peoples have gained even more awareness. And peoples have also gained in value, in courage. They have identified with the struggles of those who gave everything to liberate their peoples. And this explains why after the wave of military coup in Latin America, promoted, organized by the Yankee imperialists and joined by European imperialists, and also celebrated by other Latin American governments. Even if our America was oppressed by them. We saw the revolution of Cuba 61 years ago. It was a light in the darkness, which gave even more strength, more courage to our peoples. And then we saw the Sandinist revolution. It was a battle that cost over 100,000 deaths in 2 stages. First, the battle against Somoza, who was maintained by the Yankees. He had Yankee troops in Nicaragua. And that battle started with the murder of Sandino in 1933. Up to 1979. Thousands of people died. Thousands of people were murdered because the example of Sandino did not diminish the Nicaraguan people. The people started to fight battles, struggles on their own sides. There were Sandinist generals, 70 years old, organizing their troops, and they died fighting in Nicaragua. It was a very long battle. And then the crimes of Somoza. And later, and we learned a great lesson from all this. With imperialism, there is no way to negotiate. Because when imperialism wants to negotiate, it wants to take everything. And if they can get everything, they try to destroy. They want to destroy the government. They want to kill the leaders. And I was telling Ralph, during the 44th anniversary of the Sandinist Revolution, Ralph was telling me that we should establish dialogue with the US to look for an understanding. And I told him that in Nicaragua, the Yankees have invaded. Starting in 1854. And there was no negotiation. What we saw was a Central American unit because they realized that the Yankees were coming all across Central America. And they had a Yankee president, William Walker, in Nicaragua, recognized by the State Department. So there was a whole Central American unit and a lot of courage. And the people was able to defeat that first invasion of Yankee expansionism. But then in 1877, there was a liberal government. He did not listen to the Yankees. So the sin of this liberal government was to establish relations with the Europeans and to promote measures such as education. And at the time, Nicaragua had an obligation to provide Catholic education. It was not possible to practice any other religion. Other religions were forbidden. And if anyone died and they were not baptized, they would not go to the cemetery. They were not buried. Zelaya then arrived, and he created a revolution, not only in education, but also providing well-being and progress to the people, a certain level of development for the country. And establishing also relations with other countries trying to build the canal through Nicaragua. But at the time, the Monroe Doctrine was still alive, and this Monroe Doctrine would not allow that countries would establish agreements with other countries, even if they were also imperialists, such as the Europeans, because they were entering their territory. They felt they were the owners of this territory. So they ordered to bomb some ships, to bombard some ships in Nicaragua, and Zelaya ordered their capture. They were captured, Cannon and Gross. Those were their names, Cannon and Gross. And the US government demanded that they were released because they were going to be executed. But the law was the law at the time. And a crime like that, for a crime like that, the punishment was execution. And Zelaya ordered their execution. Immediately, the note of the Secretary of State of the United States arrived. In this note, he communicated to Zelaya on behalf of the President of the United States that he had a specific period of time to leave office. And that they were already preparing the ships with American troops to go to Nicaragua and to occupy the country if he did not leave office. Zelaya was a man that didn't want to take on the challenge of that war, and he left office. But the liberal generals, headed by Benjamin Celedón, organized the defense of Nicaragua. And they confronted Yankee troops. There is a monument, a hill that is called the Coyotepe. That was the trench of Celedón with his troops. And the Americans sent high officers of their troops that cornered Celedón to ask him to surrender, that they were offering everything to him, everything that he wanted for his surrender. And he answered with a letter that he sent to his wife, where he said that due to the honor to his family and to the people, he would not surrender. That they needed to understand that his death was a duty before surrendering. And October 4th, on his birthday, he was killed. And the Yankees took him around the streets on a parade so that the people would be terrified and would stop their fight against them. And on the streets, there was a boy, a 14, 16-year-old, just a boy. He was not a politician, but he was very brave, and he loves his country, and his name was Sandino. Years later, he told that what he saw hurt him. The humiliation that was imposed against Nicaragua hurt him so much that he committed himself to fight against the Americans, and then Sandino's battle.
So, since they couldn't defeat Sandino, they reached an agreement with the president. The troops withdrew, and they would sign other agreements to see how Sandino and his people will join the social productive life of the country. And Sandino's proposal was to organize rural cooperatives in all the areas. So the Yankee ambassador and the advisors, the military attaché, the army that they organized with Somoza, so the president says to Sandino, still in the mountains, in the guerrilla warfare, and the generals of Sandino told him not to go. You shouldn't go, because they are going to kill you. They want to kill you. And Sandino replied, our goal vis-a-vis the people was to expel the Yankees from Nicaragua. We have succeeded in this endeavor. Now our fight is far more complex because we need to fight an enemy that the people are not seeing. Therefore, we need to take up the talent to reach agreements so we can move forward in the fight against this enemy that the people are not seeing, because the troops were no longer fighting the Nicaraguan people. However, Sandino's general insisted that he shouldn't go, but in the end he decided to do that, to travel to Managua. He signed the first agreements, and he came back to talk to the generals for the final decisions. Then he went back to Managua, and after the signing, the president invited Sandino to a dinner party at the president's house, and he went there accompanied by his generals. And the president invited to the dinner his son. The president was not surrendered to the gringos. However, this president did not have the strength to make sure that his decisions were complied with. He thought that Somoza was to comply with those agreements. So after the signing, when Sandino is leaving the presidential palace, well, in collusion with the Yankee ambassador, Somoza was there waiting for him. But days before, they were not sure that Sandino was going back to Managua. But when Sandino showed up, the first thing Somoza did was to embrace him, to hug him, calling him brother. Mason brothers, and the photo is there for history. It's a history record that Judas embraced just to make sure that Sandino believed that nothing bad was going to happen. But then they assassinated Sandino. And that's why I told Brother Brad Gonsalves that it is true that we could talk, but so we need to be certain that when you talk to the Yankees, they always try to achieve their objectives, which is to destroy the revolution. That's the main objective. So after the period Nicolas mentioned of coup d'etat, tyranny everywhere, and the Yankees dominating everywhere, they were the masters. The Sandinist revolution occurred, and then the Bolivarian Revolution. The Bolivarian Revolution was the bombshell, and it made the empire tremble. The heroic and courageous Cuban Revolution was important, but it was still small economy, small country, and under the pressure of the blockade. But the Bolivarian Revolution led by Commander Hugo Chavez Frias, triumphant with a great acceptance and great power. And I told Nicolas once that when we were in the guerrilla warfare, we were victorious. There were also guerrilla fights here in Venezuela, and those guerrilla movements became very strong. And then we said, because there were guerrilla movements in Guatemala, Mexico, Brazil, the Che guerrilla movement in Bolivia. All over the region, we had guerrilla movements. But none of them was as powerful as the guerrilla movement in Venezuela. And we used to say, the next victory will be in Venezuela, a guerrilla victory. That's what we thought. And we thought that was a major push, so other victories could occur in the rest of the region. Venezuela, with intelligence, the vision of Commander Chavez, after the first attempt to overthrow the Yankees in Venezuela, he said that a very famous phrase, for now, and this became a reality. And they decided to go down the path of elections. I've said this repeatedly in Venezuela. When Chavez was alive, the eternal commander, Hugo Chavez, you have broken the law of gravity here. You've done something unprecedented in the region. Because in Chile, there was a revolution, but that revolution was defeated, demolished soon after. But in Venezuela, the revolution triumphed with a great victory. In Chile, the right was very strong, and it was a tight election, a tight victory. On the contrary, in Venezuela, it was an overwhelming victory that not only generated a lot of joy in the Venezuelan people, but also the rest of the region was overjoyed by this victory of Chavez in Venezuela. Now, who could have imagined that such a victory would occur? And could have thought that the Yankees would very quickly organize a coup d'etat against President Chavez. They were so hurt by the coup they received in Venezuela, a political, moral, economic powerhouse. They were so hurt that they quickly organized a coup against Chavez. But then you said every 11th of April has its 13th of April, and it happened. And Chavez came back victorious. And Chavez and Fidel together were thinking about the unity of our peoples, how to move forward in the struggle for unity. That is why we can today, we can easily understand the brutal, coward reaction of government of Latin American countries, because I'm convinced that the great majority of the peasants, workers, the youth, they are with Nicolas Maduro, and they are with the Bolivarian Revolution. However, the servile, the treacherous presidents, governments that have presented themselves as being revolutionary and progressive parties and governments. Well, they say that we have to have new elections in Venezuela. Brazil is saying so. Lula. I met him in Brazil after the victory. We went there to visit him as leader of the trade union movement with a lot of love.
Hacer lo que nos propone Ralph, que cree que eso se puede resolver.
Lula thinks that this could be settled through dialogue. Whoever is there to talk, that person will be always speaking on behalf of the gringos. They will never accept the win of Bolivarian revolution. After a commemoration of the revolution here, we invited Lula. And then we introduced Fidel. A strong personality Lula has as leader of the workers, and then also organizing the party. But I understand the constraints Lula has. There is an article that says that in the foreign ministry of Brazil, there are only neoliberals and rightists, and these guys are willing to fight us. Lula went to visit the Pope. And the Brazilian Foreign Ministry
que él quería hablar. Conmigo. Porque tenía un mensaje del Papa.
They called us because Lula has a message from the Pope to us. So the Vatican is a state favoring the empire. If the Vatican wants to speak to us, there is no reason to use intermediaries. They can talk to us through the foreign minister of Parolin. We could talk, and we are very clear. We've been very clear. So we really don't need intermediaries. We didn't ask Lula to be an intermediary between the Pope and us. So we didn't answer Lula until he was not happy. But then in an interview, someone asked him, That's why the dictator, after being a revolutionary, has become another Somoza. That was the question posed to Lula by the journalist, and he answered.
Él ya no es lo que fue antes.
He said that he is no longer who he used to be. He is another dictator. So, what can you expect from Lula in this case? He's been ruling for 2 terms now. So apparently you like to be president of this great country. In the region, you would like to become the representative of the Yankees in the region? That's why we broke relations with Brazil. It might be a powerful country, but we are a small country. We don't have the power of the Brazilian economy, but we have something which is more worthy: dignity and the defense of our sovereignty. And Lula, the way you have behaved in relation to the legitimate president of Venezuela is a shame. Is a shame. Repeating the very narrative of the gringos, the Europe of Europe, and of the treasonous countries of Latin America. And don't tell me that your government was extraordinary. I mean, you had a good government the first time, but I remember also the Lavajato scandal, corruption scandals during your administration. So we cannot say that your administration was very proper. And I can say many other things. If you want my respect, you have to respect me. If you want the Bolivarian people to respect you, respect the victory of President Maduro. And stop dragging before the gringos. Petro? Pooh, Petro. I think he's competing with Lula to see who is going to represent the Yankees in Latin America. That's the way I see Petro. Pooh, Petro. He doesn't have, of course, the power, the strength of Brazil. Brazil is no doubt the giant of Latin America. But with Lula's administration, he's not going to be a good country. It is going to become a Goliath trying to overcome the region. But it will fail in this attempt to become a Goliath of the region. However, I want to warn Nicolas and I guess you have already analyzed this and you are getting ready for this. This maneuver they have launched has failed. There is no way back. Nicolas is the legitimate president, continuing the battle of Chavez, and Chavez is continuing the battle of Bolivar, and today Nicolas Maduro is wielding the sword of Bolivar. However, if Nicaragua, which is a tiny land with very small and fragile economy, with border countries with military bases. Honduras has a military base, and Costa Rica also has a military base from the United States. Since they were not able to foil the success of the revolution in 1976, after 40 years of Somoza domination, imperial domination, and millions of deaths, what did they do? They organized a mercenary army, and you know very well, Nicolas, that that mercenary army, I don't think Petro is going to succumb to the temptation to organize this military army. But in Colombia, you have the mercenaries. Uribe is there. And you have heard how this former president, Colombian president, have been uttering their rejection to the legally elected government in Venezuela. And in Colombia, you have Yankee military bases. So beware, because this victory is hurting the empire more than ever. And there could be an army. They could organize an army attack against Venezuela, as they did with us. They paid for it, they armed it, they used the military bases they have in Honduras, and there was a protracted battle, 10 years of war that we had to wage. 10 years of war with thousands of deaths, more than 50,000 victims as a result of that struggle. And in the end, we prevailed, and we defeated this army of mercenaries. But in this case, the battle will be far more serious, because the Colombian army, the Colombian mercenaries, the Colombian assassins, drug traffickers will be involved. And with this long front border that you have with Colombia, I think you need to be ready. Ready in order to wage this battle and defeat them. Because if that battle occurs, you are going to defeat them. And if that battle occurs, rest assured that we are going to have Sandinist fighters accompanying you in that battle. And rest assured that in the same fashion that thousands of combatants joined the Battle of Nicaragua against Somoza, well, thousands of Latin American, Caribbean combatants will join the Venezuelan, the Bolivarian revolution to defend this revolution. And I'd like to close, Nicholas. I think I was longer than I used to be, but I'm going to close.
Este fue la primera cumbre de La Habana.
In the first summit of Havana in 2004, December. In that summit, at the end of the declaration, it said, we agree that the Bolivarian alternative for the Americas, ALBA, proposed by Hugo Chavez Frias on the occasion of the third summit of heads of state and government of the Association of Caribbean States, held in the Margarita Island, December 2001, laid down the foundations of the true Latin American and Caribbean integration premised on justice, and we commit ourselves to fight together in order to make this a reality. Also, the principle guiding ALBA is the wide solidarity among Latin American and Caribbean countries that share the thought of Bolivar, Martí, Sucre, O'Higgins, San Martin, Hidalgo, Petion, Morazan, Sandino, and so many heroes without egotism and nationalist or resistive policies that deny the objective of building a greater homeland in Latin America as the dream of the heroes of our emancipation struggles. We therefore fully coincide that ALBA will not be a reality through mercantile interest based on pure profit to prejudice other countries, only through a wide Americanist, Latin Americanist approach, making possible our countries to develop and being truly independent. Only this approach could enable us to build, as Bolivar wanted, the construction in the region, the largest state, less for the wealth than for the glory and liberty. And that Martí conceived as our America, different from the expansionist and imperialist appetite America.
ya concluyendo.
To conclude,
concertación de posiciones en la esfera multilateral.
concert of positions in the multilateral sphere and in the negotiation processes of all kinds with countries and blocs of other regions, including the struggle for democratization and transparency in international organizations, particularly the United Nations and its bodies. In the year that we commemorate the 190th anniversary of the glorious victory of Ayacucho and the call to the Amphictyonic Congress of Panama that tried to open the path toward a true process of integration of our countries. We express our conviction that now, finally, with the consolidation of the Bolivarian Revolution and the indisputable failure of the neoliberal policy imposed to our countries and the Latin American and Caribbean peoples, they are in the road towards their second and real independence, the resurgence of the Bolivarian alternative for our Americas, a proposal that Hugo Chavez Frias presented, subscribed in Havana, December 14th, 2004, Fidel Castro Ruz, President of the State Council of the Republic of Cuba, Hugo Chavez Frias. And what can I tell you? Fidel, Hugo, we will not fail you. We will continue with you, Nicolas. Thank you very much, Commander President Daniel Ortega. Thank you to the